So any person who would, that's a very essentialist definition of what humanism is when it kind of gets down into the fine-grained outworking.
I'm sorry that it's essentialist to say that women are human beings, but they are.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I am so glad you are here for this one. So we have got Matt Dillahunty going head-to-head with Dr. Randall Rouser, and they are getting into one of the biggest questions you can ask. Where do human rights actually come from? Do they exist because God says so, or because we as people decide to protect them? And it gets heated when the conversation turns to equality, women's rights, and whether the Bible can actually support what it claims to support. Trust me, you are going to want to stay for the entire thing, because the back half of this exchange has some moments that genuinely caught me off guard. Also, drop a comment and let me know what part of the world you are tuning in from. I always love seeing how far this community reaches it. Honestly makes my day every single time. All right, let us get right into it.
There are no rights except for what we codify and protect. You don't have a right to anything unless we, as a collective, say you have that right and we are going to protect that right. It makes no sense to say I have a right that nobody is going to protect or guarantee. But the question was, if I say humans are equal, and that's just the beginning point, that we're going to assert that as the foundation for the decisions we're going to make about how to codify rights. And you say human beings are equal, but you say they're equal because you're convinced they're in the image of God. My question was, how does being in the image of God make them valuable?
God is not just another person in the room. God is understood to be the maximal exemplification of goodness itself, of moral value, of obligation. So to ask, why is something valuable in virtue of being in special relationship with the source of all good? I mean, it's sort of a confused question in a sense. Now, there are other conceptions of God where that is a fair question, but I don't think on this one. You said, to come back at another direction, you said, there are no rights unless we recognize it as a collective. So then you sort of ask, so if the collective decides not to recognize the right not to be tortured or something like that,
correct,
does it follow that we don't have the right not to be tortured? It only depends upon the subjective assent. Okay, then how many human beings have to assent to a right in order for it to exist?
Whatever. So for example, once upon a time, women didn't have the right to vote in the United States, and neither did African Americans. And we granted that right. There's a difference between what right they have and what right they should have. And so under a foundation of equality, if the United States had been started on humanist principles, women and African Americans would have had a right to vote from the beginning. But because that wasn't the foundation, they had a different foundation for this. They did not have those rights and later had to fight for those rights, and then we grant them. But at the time, 100 years ago, when women couldn't vote, to say I have the right to vote would have been false. To say I should have the right to vote could well be true, because we're talking about what ought to be underneath a particular system. And under the humanist system, they should have had the right to vote. Under a Christian system, should they have had the right to vote?
Yeah.
They should have?
I believe so, yeah.
What's the foundation under Christianity to suggest that they should have had a right to vote?
Women?
Yeah.
The Imago Dei. So Genesis 1:26 and 27, the image of God, male and female together exemplify the image of God perfectly.
But wives are supposed to be subject to their husband.
So that's when you want to get into, I'm not a complementarian. So if you want to have a debate about how to understand complementarian verses, that's a different debate to have. But Genesis 1:26, 27 is a foundational text with reference to what human beings are. And human beings are equal, made in the image of God. Genesis 1:26 and 27 is actually a pretty revolutionary text in the ancient world. So you said initially, there are no rights unless we recognize it as a collective. But then when I asked you, well, so it seems like then the rights are created by simple assent of a certain number of human beings. Then you distinguish between, there's a distinction between having the right and whether they should have the right.
Yes.
So what that then seems to be is there are rights irrespective of whether human beings recognize them or not. The question is whether human beings will recognize the right, such as the right that a woman should have to vote.
It's
But
not
it
like
seems
a,
like there's
it's not like a right exists as a thing and then we codify it. When
So-
you say
so-
I should have
but you
this
said
right,
should, yeah.
when you say should have this right, you're saying under the principles of this system, what should be permissible.
This is where the foundation gets tested. Matt Dillahunty opens with something a lot of people are just not ready to hear. He says there are no rights unless we collectively agree to protect them. And I know that makes some people uncomfortable, but think about it for a second. A right that nobody enforces, nobody protects, nobody even acknowledges. What is that exactly? It is a nice sentiment and nothing more. And this is where Matt absolutely corners Randall, because Randall's entire position is that human value comes from being made in the image of God. So Matt asks the perfect question: how does being in the image of God actually make someone valuable? And Randall says, well, God is the maximal exemplification of goodness, so being in relationship with the source of all good gives you value. But here is the problem with that answer. You are using God to justify value, but you have never established why that connection creates value in the first place. You just move the goalpost back one step. It is circular reasoning. God is good. Being tied to God makes you good. Therefore, humans have worth. But you have not proven that first premise. You just declared it and expected everyone to accept it as settled. Then the conversation shifts to women and equality, and this is where it gets really revealing. Matt brings up that the Bible literally says wives are supposed to be subject to their husbands. And what does Randall do? He immediately says, I am not a complementarian, and if you want to debate those verses, that is a different debate. I need you to catch what just happened there. He dodged his own text. When your foundational scripture has a direct statement about the roles of men and women, and someone brings that up during a debate about human equality, you do not get to wave it off and say that is a separate topic. That is the topic. That is the whole point. If your system claims equality, but your own source material contradicts it, you have a foundational crack, and no amount of reframing is going to seal it.
That's it. And it's possible for the system, for example, the government of the United States, to not be consistent with its own values and positions. The fact that we talk about all men are created equal doesn't mean that all men were created equal. We had a system here in the United States that included a lip service to all men are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights and all men are created equal. And then we have a 3/5 compromise in order to value some men as worth less, even though before we had the 3/5 compromise, they were worth nothing. And so it's possible for human beings to get it wrong, to say, here's the things that I value, and then in action fail to do that. And so when I say they should have had a right, I'm saying if humanism had been the foundation of the United States, women and African Americans would have had the right to vote from the beginning, wouldn't have had to fight for it.
Humanism, as you
that's true
said,
equality.
humanism, as you said yourself, is always changing. It's open to changing. You said even it's kind of, I don't know what the term you used, an unfair debate or an asymmetric or whatever burden, because there's an openness to humanism, to adaptation, to change. Now, with that in mind, could humanism change in the future where it's no longer considered consistent with humanist values to extend a right to vote to women?
No.
That couldn't happen? You could know that a priori.
No, it's not a priori, it's a posteriori. It's because we already know there comes a point where at the beginning, you may not know all the best things, but at least you've narrowed your focus as you begin to learn more about what could be in the pool of right. And until something comes along that shows that allowing women to vote is somehow anti-human or anti-equality, then that couldn't happen. And if it happens, then now you're in a conflict because women are humans. So they have to have those rights. So no, nothing could happen that could make the denying women the right to vote consistent with the values of human equality.
Is it possible that E equals MC squared could be overturned in the future?
I have no idea.
Possible? I mean, the interesting thing is that at the end of the 19th, but at the end of the 19th century, physics physicists widely believe physics was basically closed. There were no longer big questions to be answered. It was all working out to the 10th decimal point. And then along comes a paradigm shift, and now E equals MC squared, and relativity theory changes everything. So I think I'd be pretty cautious about saying you couldn't have conceivably another paradigm shift.
No, this isn't a paradigm shift. This is saying, can there be a married bachelor? If the foundational declaration of humanism is that humans, irrespective of gender, are equal, then you cannot then have we're not going to let women, we're going to let men vote, but not women vote. You can't have that.
So any person who would, that's a very essentialist definition of what humanism is, when it kind of gets down into the fine-grained outworking.
I'm sorry that it's essentialist to say that women are human beings, but they are.
Now Matt takes it to a completely different level. He brings up the founding of the United States, and this is where people really need to pay attention. He points out that the same document that declared all men are created equal also contained the 3/5 Compromise built right into its framework. For anyone who might not know, the 3/5 Compromise was an arrangement in early American history where enslaved people were counted as 3/5 of a person for purposes of political representation. So the very same founders writing about equality were simultaneously encoding into law that some human beings counted as less. And Matt's point here is devastating. He says if humanism had been the foundation from the start, women and African Americans would have had the right to vote on day one. No marches, no movements, no generational trauma from fighting for what should have already been yours. It would have been automatic because equality means equality. Full stop. And then Randall tries something clever. He asks whether E=mc² could be overturned in the future, and you can see exactly what he is going for. He wants to suggest that if scientific paradigms can shift, then maybe humanist values could shift too. Maybe one day humanism could decide women should not vote, and Matt shuts this down perfectly. He says this is not a paradigm shift. This is asking, can there a married bachelor? And that is the key right there. If your foundational declaration says all humans, regardless of gender, are equal, then denying women the right to vote is not some future possibility. It is a logical contradiction. It is like saying this circle is a square. The words cancel each other out. Then Randall calls this an essentialist view of humanism, and Matt fires back with one of the cleanest lines I've heard in any debate. He says, I am sorry that it is essentialist to say that women are human beings, but they are. No filler, no hesitation. Just pure precision wrapped in the kind of delivery that leaves absolutely no room for a comeback.
Well, that's not the issue. Is humanism is the idea that human beings are the normative status or criterion for human flourishing. It's one step removed to say, therefore, everybody should have an equal right to vote, right? It's not the same thing. It's not a logical entailment. I think it's something you should affirm. The question is, how do you affirm it? You say it's a posteriori and that humanism could never possibly change, and yet you ground it on the same basic framework empirically of gaining new evidence from the world around you that presumably you do through things like natural science, and yet we can't have confidence in natural science that paradigms cannot be overturned.
I'm sorry. I was doing the charitable listening thing where I presumed when you asked the question that what we were asking here is, would it be fair, would it be reasonable in the future under humanism for women to not be allowed to vote, but men to not be allowed to vote, but men to be allowed to vote as just categories? Is there a circumstance under which some women might be denied vote? Yeah, especially if they're a felon. Is there a position under which all women would be denied the right to vote? Yes, if we removed voting from everyone. But as long as the foundational principle is people have these rights, and as long as women are people, it's just set theory that there's no circumstance under which women don't have those rights in that system. This is simple. I mean, this is set theory logic 101. If women are people and people have this right, then there's no circumstance in that scenario.
The second premise, people have this right, is the one that I'm asking about, right? You're just assuming that could never change. That every person should have this right.
I'm talking, oh my gosh. Is it possible that under a humanist regime, humanists could get together and deny women the right to vote and be inconsistent with their own values? Sure. But it's just as possible as the United States saying all men are created equal, but they're not. I'm not talking about what individuals may do in getting it wrong. I'm talking about what is consistent with the principles of humanism. And if humanism begins with you're all equal and men and women are both human, then any proposition that says, okay, we're going to exclude women from human is inconsistent with the values. Could it happen? Sure. I suppose there's a despot somewhere who could claim to be a humanist and then do the most antithetical things to humanism. But that's not an indictment on humanism. If we're going to compare humanism and Christianity and which one's better for the world, you don't get to pretend that there's a tin-pot despot out there, tinfoil, I can't even get the phrase right, who's going to ignore the values of humanism. You might as well be saying, is it possible for there to be Christians out there who are calling for the slaughter of every person on the planet except for Randall? Yeah, it's possible. Only in a really wacko logical sense. It's not realistic, and it's not an indictment of Christianity. It's an indictment of those people. So if you're going to try to indict humanism, you don't get to say, is there a scenario under which some people might ignore the principles of humanism while claiming they're underneath the principles?
And here is where Matt just closes the door on everything. Because Randall is still trying to find some hypothetical angle where humanism falls apart. And Matt reduces the entire argument down to basic set theory. He says if women are people and people have this right, then there is no scenario where women do not have that right within that system. That is it. That is logic at its most fundamental. And I love this moment because Matt is not trying to be impressive. He is not reaching for complicated philosophy. He is using the most elementary framework possible, and Randall still cannot find a way around it. But what comes next is what I think is the single best moment of this entire exchange. Randall keeps pushing this idea that maybe humanists could one day abandon their own principles. And Matt says, okay, sure, a humanist could theoretically do something completely against humanist values, but that is not an indictment of humanism. That is an indictment of that individual person. And then he flips the whole thing. He says you might as well ask whether there could be Christians out there calling for the most extreme things imaginable while still claiming to follow Christianity. And the answer is yes, technically it is possible, but that does not make Christianity the problem. It makes those people the problem. And this is such an important distinction that gets lost in almost every debate about moral frameworks. You cannot judge a system by the people who violate it. That would be like saying the entire concept of law is broken because criminals exist. The framework is not invalidated because someone chooses to ignore it. The framework stands on its own merits. What makes this even more powerful is that Matt is being completely fair. He is not attacking Christianity to score points. He is demonstrating that the same standard applies to both sides equally. If you would not hold Christianity accountable for every person who distorts it, then you absolutely cannot hold humanism to that double standard. That is intellectual honesty at its finest. You do not just tear down the other side. You show that your own framework survives the exact same pressure test. And Matt did that here in a way that was clean and logical, and frankly very hard for anyone to argue against. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.